Let's be honest, the debate over transgender athletes in sports has become one of the most intense and, frankly, confusing political issues of our time. For a lot of us, it feels like it just appeared out of nowhere, but now it's all over the news and in our state legislatures. So today, we're going to cut through the noise. We're going to break down the key arguments, look at the evidence behind them, and see what the real-world impact of all this actually is. Okay, so here's our game plan. First up, we'll look at how this became such a massive political issue so quickly. Then we're diving straight into the two big arguments you hear all the time: competition and safety. After that, we'll uncover the political strategy that's really fueling this whole thing. And finally, and this is so important, we'll look at how all of this affects the young athletes who are caught right in the middle. So, first things first. How on earth did the participation of a very, very small number of young athletes become such a top-tier national priority? Well, as with so many things, a big part of the answer is about following the money. The source material for this explainer points to a staggering financial investment to put this issue front and center. I mean, we're talking about over $116 million spent on TV ads about this in just 1 year. And all that ad spending, all that political focus, it's had very real, tangible consequences. Right now, 25 states, that's half the country, have passed laws that ban or restrict transgender students from playing sports. Okay, so let's dig into the first core argument we hear constantly, that allowing trans women and girls to compete just makes sports inherently unfair. To back this up, you'll often hear a huge, really shocking number, that nearly 900 medals have been lost by female athletes to transgender competitors. That's a powerful statistic, right? It gets used all the time. But where does it actually come from? Well, the number is usually attributed to a UN report. That sounds official, it sounds credible, but as soon as you start to pull back the curtain on that claim, the story gets a whole lot more complicated. It turns out this wasn't an official report to the UN at all. It was a submission to the UN by one person. And the data? It was crowdsourced from a website where basically anyone could claim a loss. The math is also pretty interesting. A single first-place win by a trans athlete was counted as 3 lost medals, for silver and bronze too. And get this, the list of sports included things like poker, Irish dancing, and even local fun runs. Now, beyond the big stats, the debate often comes down to individual stories. And the most famous case, by far, is the swimmer Lia Thomas. Her story is often told through the eyes of Riley Gaines, an athlete who competed against her and has become a prominent voice on this issue. So let's look at the actual data behind that emotional moment. In the race at the center of all this controversy, Lia Thomas and Riley Gaines didn't just swim close times. They swam the exact same time, down to the 100th of a second. They tied for 5th place. So this all begs the question, what does the science actually say? Well, it turns out scientists on all sides of this debate pretty much agree on one thing: we barely have any research. There are only about a dozen studies on trans women, and most of them are really small. And here's the absolute kicker: there is zero, literally zero, peer-reviewed research on adolescent trans athletes. That's the very group that almost all of these laws are targeting. All right, let's pivot to the second major argument that's always raised: the concern for the physical safety of cisgender female athletes, especially when you're talking about contact sports. The most widely cited example here involves a high school volleyball player named Peyton McNabb, who tragically suffered a serious concussion after being hit by a spike from a transgender opponent. It was a scary event, for sure. But the source material also adds some important context that often gets left out. McNabb recovered and was back on the field playing a full season of softball the next spring. On top of that, 2 coaches from opposing teams went on the record to say they had no safety concerns and had actually seen cisgender girls hit the ball even harder. Then there was another story that went viral about a college volleyball player. A lawsuit claimed her spikes were flying at over 80 miles per hour. But when ESPN actually used software to analyze video of those same spikes, they found the average speed was closer to 50 miles per hour. Now, that's still really fast, but it's a huge difference and nowhere near a record. So let's just take a step back. If the evidence around fairness and competition is pretty murky and the safety incidents are more complicated than they're often presented, then why is this issue so incredibly prominent? Well, to understand that, you have to look at the political strategy. The source material for this explainer describes a very intentional strategic pivot. You might remember back in the mid-2010s, so-called bathroom bills were the big issue. But they mostly failed and caused a huge backlash. So conservative groups regrouped and they shifted their focus to sports, which turned out to be a way more effective political wedge issue for them. And look, this wasn't some secret backroom plan. They said the quiet part out loud. Here's a quote from the president of one of the key groups driving this, the American Principles Project. He said, "We pivoted to the sports issue and it's been wildly successful." Why? Because it got opponents of the LGBT movement comfortable with talking about transgender issues. It was a calculated political move. So we've covered the stats, the stories, and the politics. But let's talk about what this all means for the actual people at the center of it, the kids who just want to play a game with their friends. See, as the source material shows, for these young people, sports isn't about winning championships or getting scholarships. It's about finding a community, building some confidence, and just being a kid. As this young athlete put it, for many of them, it's literally a lifeline. This is where you start to see some really stark contrasts in what gets prioritized. Take Kentucky. The legislature there held a special session just so they could override the governor's veto of a bill to ban the state's one known trans middle school athlete from playing. In that very same session, a different bill, one designed to protect kids from coaches accused of sexual abuse, was left to just stall and die. So why did that abuse prevention bill die? Well, the source reports it was because lawmakers decided to break for dinner and they just never came back to vote on it. And a direct consequence of all these laws is that it creates an environment where all kids' bodies are suddenly up for public debate. In Utah, an adult official went on Facebook to publicly question the gender of a high school girl, who, by the way, wasn't even trans. And in Florida, a trans girl was kicked off her team after a massive investigation where other kids, her teammates, were asked invasive questions about her body. I think a teammate of that girl in Florida just reframes this whole thing so powerfully. She said, "Their main argument is about fairness in sports, but how about fairness among humans? Right now, she's not being treated like a human." That just cuts right to the heart of it, doesn't it? And that really brings us to our final question. If the stated goal of all of this is to protect and support female athletes, what are the conversations we're not having? While all this political energy is focused on a handful of transgender kids, huge systemic problems like unequal pay, worse facilities, and rampant sexual abuse in women's sports often get ignored. It really makes you wonder, what's the real endgame here?